Everybody, good evening. My name is Diane Rosenberg, and I'm the Executive Director of Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors, JFAN. I want to welcome you to tonight's JFAN annual meeting, Stop the CAFOS, How the Buffalo National River Did It and How Iowa Could Do Better. Gordon Watkins, the president and co-founder of the Buffalo River Watershed Alliance, has a very inspiring and compelling story to share with us tonight about the victory his community had in protecting the country's first national river. If you were able to sign on early and saw some of those photos of this treasured natural resource, you'll understand why this was an important fight for them to undertake. And that brings me to Iowa and Dr. Chris Jones, who is also joining us tonight. Chris is known to be a staunch water quality advocate in Iowa. He'll talk about why it's been so difficult to pass state legislation that protects water quality and public health from industrial agriculture. But yet, on a more exciting and forward-thinking note, Chris is going to be talking about his recently published comprehensive progressive food and farm policy that could make some very important and needed agricultural changes in Iowa. And that's especially relevant given Iowa's high and growing cancer rates. So my hope is that tonight we can share some of that inspiration from the Buffalo River victory and move it into positive and constructive changes that could help us fight to improve Iowa's agricultural practices. Now, after we hear from our speakers, we're going to leave some time for your questions. So I want to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, because we likely won't see them in the chat. And we'll get to as many as we can. So for those who are new to JFAN, we're a nonprofit community organization, and for the last 20 years, we've been working to help protect Jefferson County from CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, also known as factory farms. Now, we're not anti-agriculture. We support and advocate for traditional, independent livestock farming that enables more farmers to be on the land, practicing responsible, respectful, and regenerative agriculture. So before we begin, I want to make some brief announcements and share with you some action alerts that need your support. So the first is that the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the DNR, is conducting a 3-year review of water quality standards. This is something that's required by the Clean Water Act. So JFAN is among 8 organizations that signed on to a comprehensive set of recommendations that was put together by the Iowa Environmental Council. Now, we as individuals can also submit public comments by Monday, October 20th by 4:30 p.m. We're going to put that link in the chat as well. Now, yesterday, the IEC held a webinar on how to submit effective public comments on these water quality standards. We'll put that link in the chat as well, so you can look at that link to get some good information there. Now, next, there's going to be a call-in day to oppose the EATS Act that's now being called the Save the Bacon Act, and that would nullify California Proposition 12, which requires more humane space for pigs, chickens, and veal sold in California. Now, if the EATS, Save the Bacon Act, is passed, this bill would throw out about 1,100 state and local agricultural laws around the country because it would prohibit states or local municipalities from passing an agricultural law that's more stringent than any other state's agricultural laws. In essence, the weakest laws in the nation would be the standard affecting food safety and farmers. Now, this is pretty horrible bill. So the ASPCA is holding a call-in day on also Monday, October 20th, and I encourage everyone to get on the phones to register your opposition to that. Food and Water Watch is also phone banking that day, and you can participate in that. So we'll share both of those options for you in the chat as well. Now, before I go any further, I just want to tell you that I'm giving you a lot of links, but we're going to be sending an email out with all of these links tomorrow, all these links that I'm mentioning tonight, so you'll have them all in one place. Now, we expect the Iowa Pesticide Immunity Bill to be reintroduced in 2026, but that's a little bit down the road. Right now, there's some federal legislation regarding pesticide immunity and preemption that needs our immediate attention. The first is regarding language that is proposed in the Farm Bill that would overturn all pesticide regulations that are set by states and local communities that might be more stringent than the federal levels. This is similar to the EATS Act, but it's focused just on pesticide riders. The Environmental Working Group has an action alert that will enable you to send a letter to your legislators opposing any of these riders. We'll put that in the chat. There's also the Permit Act that would make sweeping changes to the Clean Water Act, cutting all sorts of necessary provisions and weakening it dramatically. It's very destructive to our nation's water quality. And in Iowa, we don't need any more polluted waters. We'll put that link in the chat for you as well, for you to send a letter to your legislator. Now, obviously, we all have some work to do, but I encourage you to take this action. And I also encourage you to take some inspiration from tonight's meeting, because it's really quite remarkable what can happen when we all work together and we don't give up. So as I said, watch for an email with these links. Okay, before we begin, I just want to take another moment to acknowledge some of our corporate sponsors for the JFAN annual meeting. These are local businesses and state organizations that value and support the work that JFAN does to protect not only Jefferson County, but Iowans across the state from factory farms. I want to first acknowledge our platinum sponsor, Aeron Lifestyle Technology, a very successful fragrance diffuser business here in Iowa. And I also want to acknowledge our two gold sponsors, Driftless Water Defenders, an advocacy group like JFAN, working to protect the driftless region in Northeast Iowa, and Vastu Homes, the developer of North Campus Village in Fairfield. I really want to extend a very warm thank you for their generous support. They helped to make this meeting and all of our work possible. Okay, now let's get to our first speaker. So I'm so pleased to introduce Gordon Watkins, the president and co-founder of the Buffalo River Watershed Alliance, a nonprofit organization with over 3,000 supporters and over 20,000 online followers. After shutting down C&H hogs, the Alliance continues to monitor and address other threats to the Buffalo National River. Gordon and his wife run an organic farm in the Ozark Mountains, and they operate a tourism business that caters to tourists visiting the Buffalo National River. So he knows firsthand how CAFO development impacts the region. Gordon told me the entire story when we first talked. I have to tell you, it really made me feel happy and good to see this kind of a victory take place. So Gordon, I really want to thank you for being with us here tonight and sharing the story with everyone.
Thank you, Diane. I appreciate your invitation and all the folks at JFAN for inviting me to tell you our story today. It's a 12-year story, so it's a little difficult to condense down into a 30-minute presentation. So please bear with me, and I'll do my best to hit the high points. But I'm also available for questions and answers afterwards. So with that, I'll go ahead and start the slides, and so you can see a little bit about why this is so important to us. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Buffalo National River, but this is one of the iconic images of it right here. So this is a story about how we were able to shutter an existing 6,500 head swine CAFO supported by multinational corporations and then secure permanent protections against such threats in the future. I have to say that when Diane first contacted me, I felt a little sheepish. We realized that our efforts and eventual success in defeating one single CAFO in a state with less than 800 swine operations pales in comparison to your battles here in Iowa, where you have over 4,000 of your own to contend with. However, we hope that by sharing our story, perhaps we can empower others to protect other special places and preserve precious natural resources. This is not just a story about our small volunteer organization, but a story of the power of collaboration and community engagement with a common goal of protecting a special place, our first national river. You will hear me speak positively about the important roles two of our governors played in our success. This was not always the case. For the first 6 years, state agencies and the legislature staunchly opposed our efforts towards closure. And for the last 6 years, legislators likewise opposed a moratorium. It was only when the weight of public opinion reached a critical mass that the tables finally turned. Let's see, for some reason I'm not advancing here. Our story can't be told without recognizing a singular feature which enabled our success in closing the hog CAFO, the Buffalo National River, which I'll call the BNR for here on out, just for simplicity's sake. The BNR is well known and well loved across our region and the state, and a little history of its creation as the nation's first national river is important to understanding our success. The first battle to save the Buffalo began in the 1950s to oppose Corps of Engineers proposals to build dams on the Buffalo for hydroelectric and recreational purposes. And the story of the first battle for the Buffalo began in the 60s with the creation of the Ozark Society, which was very instrumental in the creation. They were joined by the Arkansas Audubon Society, the Arkansas Wildlife Federation, the Federation of Women's Garden Clubs, and others. And part of the work to achieve protection of the river was to bring Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas, along with other legislators, to the Buffalo to actually see for themselves why it was important to protect. The artist Thomas Hart Benton also was instrumental in publicizing the natural beauty of the Buffalo. So finally, in 1972, President Nixon designated the Buffalo National River as our nation's first national river. The National River designation protects natural rivers from industrial uses, impoundments, and other obstructions that might change the natural character of the river. So long story short, after a 10-year battle, the creation by Congress of the first national river provided permanent protections, or so we thought. Fast forward to 2012, when the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality, which issues permits in our state, quietly issued a permit for C&H hog farms, a 6,500 head swine farrowing operation located near Big Creek, the second largest tributary in the watershed, just 6 miles upstream from the Buffalo National River. Because of minimal public notice, the National Park Service and the public were unaware of the permit until early 2013, when construction was nearly complete. Public outrage was swift and loud. The state legislature recognized that weak public notice was a problem and soon adopted more robust requirements going forward and put in place a 5-year temporary moratorium against new swine permits in the watershed. As a result of public outrage and concern, the Buffalo River Watershed Alliance, which I'll refer to as BRWA, was formed in early 2013. We formed with 2 goals in mind. Number 1 was closure of the C&H CAFO, and number 2 was to secure a permanent moratorium against any new CAFOs in the watershed. So we had a pretty simple goals and missions. BRWA was the local boots on the ground organization composed mostly of residents of the watershed. To expand our reach beyond the watershed, we then organized the Buffalo River Coalition, a collaboration with 4 like-minded organizations, which are shown here: the Ozark Society, the Ozark River Stewards, National Parks Conservation Association, and the Arkansas Canoe Club. Together, we pooled resources to engage legal representation and lobbying services, and we hosted numerous fundraising, public education, and media events. The synergy created by this collaboration was key to our success. To this day, we all meet regularly to address issues which affect the Buffalo National River. This map shows the Buffalo National River watershed in green, with the river itself in blue and park boundaries in tan. Unlike our more expansive national parks such as Yosemite and Yellowstone, the Buffalo National River is a 153-mile-long narrow ribbon encompassing just 95,000 acres, which makes up only 11% of the watershed which feeds it. While some of the watershed outside park boundaries is comprised of public land such as national forest and state wildlife areas, most is private. It is susceptible to contamination from activities outside the park boundaries, such as swine CAFOs, a problem further exacerbated by a geologic peculiarity of the watershed: karst topography. Karst is a common feature in the Ozarks and the Buffalo National River watershed in particular. Karst is a geologic term referring to shallow soils underlain by porous limestone and characterized by sinkholes, caves, disappearing streams, and springs. Groundwater and surface water, when it emerges in springs, is highly susceptible to contaminants applied to the surface, such as raw animal waste. We don't have the luxury of having deep topsoils to filter contaminants applied to the surface. This porous limestone leaks. It's a very leaky geology that we deal with here, and it's very susceptible to damage. Here's some examples of karst. The upper left photo shows a sinkhole that opened up beneath a golf course, which was then excavated as a tourist attraction. For scale, notice the excavator at the upper right of the picture. This shows what lies beneath much of the Ozarks. Lower left is a spring emerging from a cave, and on the right, exploring an underground stream. These are all very characteristic of our area of the country. This map shows Big Creek flowing into the Buffalo National River, which is shown in green at the top. The orange areas are the spray fields alongside Big Creek, where raw hog waste was applied by spray trucks to hay crops, as shown on the right. The big issue was the permitted amount of waste applied, which, regulated by the flawed Arkansas Phosphorus Index, was far in excess of agronomic need, meaning much more was being applied than grasses could take up, which led to a continual increase in soil phosphorus, which was then released during runoff and soil erosion during heavy rain events. Let me go back and point out one other thing. You'll notice there in the middle of the picture, it says Mount Judy School. That's a K through 12 public school that was immediately adjacent to one of the spray fields. There were times when waste was being applied when the entire school stunk of raw hog waste, which, as you know, is not very pleasant, not very conducive to education. So BRWA relied heavily on sound science to argue for closure of the CAFO. Because of heightened public concern over the potential for contamination of Big Creek and the BNR, monitoring and research was undertaken by several state and federal entities. BRWA began its own monitoring program, which continues today. We also participated in a peer-reviewed dye trace study by a noted hydrogeologist to determine susceptibility of the Buffalo River to surface contaminants in the watershed. As you can see in these photos, on the left, dye was injected into a hand-dug well, and on the right is a sinkhole located in a disappearing stream, both near the spray fields, which this dye was then traced to its emergence in surrounding streams and springs, including miles away in the Buffalo River. This map shows the results of that dye trace study. The yellow star that you see at the bottom center of the picture shows the location of the hog CAFO itself, and where the star represents where the dye was injected. The purple dots show where the dye was detected, including in adjacent subwatersheds and even apparently upstream in adjacent watersheds, and many, many miles away in the Buffalo River watershed itself. If you notice in the upper right, it says Mitch Hill Spring. That's one of the largest springs in the Buffalo River, and a dye was detected there. This showed that subsurface flow had little correlation with surface topography and illustrates the vulnerability of the Buffalo River to activities in its watershed. And this study was instrumental in our ability to contest the hog CAFO based on solid science. As I said, it was a peer-reviewed research study. As mentioned, because of the controversial nature of the CAFO, numerous state and federal agencies, including the University of Arkansas, the Department of Environmental Quality, the USGS, the National Park Service, and BRWA, conducted regular and extensive water quality testing of the creek downstream from the CAFO. All of this data was submitted to the Department of Environmental Quality for use in its EPA-required biennial assessment of state water bodies. In 2018, this combined data led to Big Creek downstream of the CAFO and adjacent sections of the Buffalo River being added to the EPA's 303D list of impaired streams due to low dissolved oxygen and elevated E. coli, indications of excessive nutrients from animal waste. The red lines indicate the impaired segments of both of these streams. The line running from left to right across the top is the Buffalo River, and the line running up and down is Big Creek. Note the correlation between the impaired segments shown in red and the positive dye sites shown by the purple dots. Only one other segment in the entire 153 miles of the Buffalo River was impaired due to a damaged wastewater treatment plant, which has since been corrected. These impaired segments continue to be impaired. Phosphorus, a major component of swine waste, binds to soil particles and is then released over time when soil is eroded during rain events. Research shows that it may take as long as 20 years for phosphorus to be eliminated from saturated soils. Every agency that monitored the Buffalo River confirmed that the water became more polluted over the 5 years of CAFO operations. This CAFO was the largest producer of nutrients and bacteria in the watershed and generated large amounts of phosphorus. Following CAFO closure, all application fields still contained excessive phosphorus, ensuring nutrients will be discharged in runoff and erosion for years to come. Algae can be an indicator of excessive nutrients. While seasonal algae blooms are not uncommon in the Buffalo River, the extent of algae downstream from the CAFO was unprecedented prior to closure of the facility in 2019. As this shows, in the summer of 2017, there were 20 miles of algae. In the summer of 2018, there were 70 miles of algae. You can see some pictures of it in the upper left. The American Rivers Organization awarded the Buffalo the dubious distinction as one of the top 10 most endangered rivers in 2017 and again in 2018. We used this award in our media and outreach efforts to highlight the imminent threat to the Buffalo River posed by the CAFO and to argue for its closure. The Buffalo River is located in one of the poorest parts of Arkansas, and in 2024, 1.7 million visitors generated over $88 million in economic business and supported almost 900 jobs. Those were all visitors to the Buffalo River. In contrast, the C&H CAFO supported 6 jobs. The Buffalo River is an economic engine in an area with few job opportunities. Arkansas is known as the natural state, and many promotional websites and publications feature the Buffalo River to attract business, residents, retirees, and visitors. The images shown here are just a sampling of those used to promote the state. They all show images of the Buffalo River. The Buffalo River is designated as a primary contact stream, with paddling, swimming, and camping being popular activities. Degradation of water quality of the Buffalo River, especially if it impacts human health, would result in reduced visitation and would have a devastating impact on our local economy. The Buffalo River is near and dear to the hearts of Arkansans and many across the nation. When the river was created in 1972, the musician Jimmy Driftwood called it Arkansas's gift to the nation, America's gift to the world. From the moment in early 2013 that the public became aware of the risk to the buffalo, opposition to the CAFO was galvanized. Public meetings, media engagement, protests, letter writing, and ultimately legislative action helped steer the rising tide of concern. Our success in this arena was due to carefully coordinated and thoughtfully executed campaigns on several fronts, including public education, coalition building, and legal, political, and legislative actions. You can see here on the upper left, that's Governor Asa Hutchinson signing a proclamation acknowledging the importance of the Buffalo River. And in the lower right was a public protest held on the banks of the Buffalo River. BRWA created a website and a monthly newsletter. We established a social media presence and held public meetings across the state to educate the public about the issue. Proliferation of CAFOs was a concern, and we brought in Rick Dove and Larry Baldwin, both from the North Carolina Waterkeepers, for a 6-city whistle-stop tour to alert the public to the devastating impacts of swine CAFOs in North Carolina. We sponsored letter writing campaigns to state leaders via house parties and farmers markets. We held gala events and film festivals and spoke to civic organizations across the state. We learned how to understand the cryptic permitting process, how to read nutrient management plans, and how to decipher the phosphorus index, allowing us to make persuasive and rational arguments for closure of the CAFO. As mentioned, in early 2013, BRW helped organize the Buffalo River Coalition to expand our influence beyond the watershed level. This informal coalition of like-minded organizations included the Ozark Society, Arkansas Canoe Club, the National Parks Conservation Association, and others. We meet regularly to this day to develop solutions to threats to the Buffalo River. In addition, we worked with other organizations across the state to expand our reach. These included the National Audubon Society, the Arkansas Wildlife Federation, the Backcountry Horsemen, and other watershed protection groups. The upper left photo shows the musical duo Still on the Hill. BRW administered a National Park Service grant for them to write and perform across the state an album of story songs about the buffalo. While there were no references specifically to CAFOs or to the controversy surrounding them, the tour nevertheless raised public awareness about the importance of protecting this priceless natural resource. In mid-2013, the coalition reached out to public interest law firm Earth Justice to explore legal options to close the CNH CAFO. Along with Earthrise, another law firm, they agreed to represent us in a successful challenge in federal court against the Farm Services Agency and the Small Business Administration for their lax environmental reviews when issuing loan guarantees for farm loans. Although it did not result in closure of CNH, it did strengthen environmental protections nationwide and got the attention of state agencies and decision makers. In addition, BRWA engaged state law firms for multiple administrative challenges of the CNH permits, culminating ultimately in the denial of a renewal permit in 2018 and closure in 2019. From our earliest efforts to close CNH, our most formidable foe was Arkansas Farm Bureau. They, along with the Arkansas Pork Producers Association, supported first by Cargill and later by JBS, made CNH their poster child for right to farm and property rights issues, and they threw their considerable weight behind discrediting our work. We fought their onslaught with hard science and fact-based persuasive arguments, and we were careful not to use their tactics of personal attacks and fear-mongering. Many letter-writing events ensured that our concerns were heard by decision makers and kept the issue alive. We made innumerable treks to Little Rock to meet with legislators and agency heads. Because in 2012, the initial CNH permit was issued quietly and received no public comments, we were denied the ability to challenge the permit as a whole until it came up for renewal after 5 years. But until that time, we used every opening to challenge every proposed modification or other opportunity to challenge the permit. On many occasions, we used legal representation as well as public comments to share our concerns with the Pollution Control and Ecology Commission, the regulatory body responsible for developing permitting rules and regulations in Arkansas. These challenges not only provided us with legal standing to further challenge in court should it become necessary, they also provided an opportunity for press releases and media attention. Once the permit was due for renewal, we used every tool available to challenge all aspects of the permit, and in doing so, we proved that the original permit did not meet statutory requirements. Specifically, it did not meet federal guidance regarding karst sites. Had the Department of Environmental Quality properly enforced this guidance, the applicant would have been required to seek a different site. Our arguments proved persuasive and resulted in the state denying CNH a new operating permit. With the state acknowledging its mistake and issuing the original permit, this set the stage for a negotiated closure of the facility. In January of 2018, our coalition engaged a lobbying firm to provide more access and influence over agencies, the governor, and the state legislature. This enabled us to address legislators and their committee meetings. We hosted legislative committee meetings in the watershed, and we organized a float trip on the Buffalo for members of the legislature and agency heads. In the upper left photo, you'll see that raft has the head of the Agriculture Department, as well as two very important legislators. These efforts paid off when in June of 2019, the governor announced closure of the CNH facility. Governor Asa Hutchinson, who took office in 2014 after the CAFO was operational and served throughout the CNH controversy, stated publicly that he had received more letters and calls seeking closure of CNH than any other issue during his two terms of office. In 2019, when CNH was backed into a corner by denial of a new permit, Governor Hutchinson, realizing the state had made an error when issuing the initial permit in 2012, stepped in and negotiated a $6.2 million buyout of the facility and placed a conservation easement on the property to prevent its reopening. In addition, he directed his state agencies to initiate a rulemaking to prohibit any future swine CAFO permits in the Buffalo River watershed. However, Arkansas requires any new or revised regulations to be approved by the legislature. Under the persuasive influence of the Farm Bureau in 2019, the legislature refused to approve a moratorium. The battle continued. When Governor Hutchinson's final term expired in 2022, with the moratorium still in limbo, he was replaced by Sarah Huckabee Sanders. One of her top priorities was to make Arkansas the outdoor recreation capital of the United States, highlighting rock climbing, mountain biking, and of course, canoeing and kayaking. The Buffalo National River is the state's icon of outdoor education, and it was vulnerable to a repeat of the CNH debacle due to a lack of permanent protections. When Farm Bureau attempted to preempt legislative action on a moratorium by introducing legislation in 2025 to prohibit watershed-based permit moratoriums, Governor Sanders stepped in to exert her considerable influence, and the bill was amended to carve out a permanent moratorium for the Buffalo River. Swine CAFOs will no longer threaten the Buffalo National River. While we were relieved that the CNH facility was closed and the buffalo is free from the threats of future hog CAFOs, we realize that there will always be new threats on the horizon. Eternal vigilance is the price we pay to protect our special places. The buffalo is no exception. Thank you. And after presentations, I'll be happy to take any questions you might have. I'll hand it back to Diane.
Thank you, Gordon. That's quite a story. And it really strikes me how there were so many aspects of this effort to get this closed. And it sounded like it took a lot of people working over a period of time, a lot of time to really make this happen. Um, you know, I'm just curious before I just want to just do a follow-up question with you right now. I've worked with communities where it can be very difficult to stop CAFOs, and it can be very challenging physically, emotionally, and all of that. How did you all stay firm, continuing, on with this fight? Because a lot of community groups, they give up, but a lot of them don't. So what was it about your organizing your group that really allowed it to go to the finish line with this?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And I should mention that we have a very committed board of directors. Over the years, it has rotated. Numerous people have rotated in and out of our board. We have a tremendous base of supporters that stood with us every step of the way. And I think what kept us going was there were points of success along the way. And those moments of success, even though they were small at times, they kept us energized to continue on. And as you said in your opening remarks, persistence and patience are important at the end of the day. You've got to stick with it. And I think a lot of our opponents assumed that we would burn out and fade away and fall by the wayside. And we were intent that that was not going to happen. And so we took steps to make sure that we could continue that fight. And it was because of the numerous people who had our backs along the way.
Yeah, it's a great story. And yes, persistence is a very big part of it, and people working together and sticking, and the publicity is a very big part of a win like that. So I really congratulate you all for what you did. It's a big deal. You
Thank
know,
you.
the
And one thing that I didn't mention in here is that we had a reporter with our statewide newspaper who was a nephew of Congressman John Paul Hammerschmidt, who was responsible for the creation of the Buffalo River back in 1972. And
Hmm,
he's an opinion writer, and he made this his special cause. And so for 10 years or more, he recently passed away, unfortunately, but for 10 years or more, he kept us alive in our statewide newspaper. So that was of critical importance.
excellent. Very good. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that story, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions when we get to that point. Um, okay. So, before I introduce Chris, I want to acknowledge our silver corporate sponsors tonight. These are companies and organizations that are also great friends of JFAN. Their support also helps to make JFAN's work and this meeting possible. So a very big thank you goes to Bob Ferguson Wellness, Centered Wealth, Everybody's Whole Foods, Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement, Iowa Environmental Council, Iowa Farmers Union, Radiant Health Imaging, Soil Technologies Corp., and Village Realty. Thank you all for everything you do to help keep JFAN strong. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Chris Jones. Chris is the president of the Driftless Water Defenders, and as I mentioned before, a fierce advocate for Iowa's water quality. He's worked as a research engineer at the University of Iowa before he retired, and that's where he ran the Iowa Water Quality Information System that provides real-time water quality monitoring in the state, at least for now. Before that, he worked at the Des Moines Waterworks and the Iowa Soybean Association, so he has a very clear understanding of how industrial agriculture impacts our water quality. Chris is famously the author of The Swine Republic, struggles with the truth about agriculture and water quality, and he writes a popular Substack column also called The Swine Republic. And Chris is also a JFAN board member. Now, he has excellent insights into how the state legislature needs to improve agricultural regulations. And he also has clear insights and a vision for a progressive food and farm policy that can make great strides in protecting our water and public health and ultimately fostering a healthy agricultural system. And he's going to talk about that with us tonight. So, Chris, thank you for being here and joining this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Thanks for inviting me here tonight. And when I listen to Gordon's presentation there, I'm reminded of something I've heard about this sort of work. And when we try to improve something like the Buffalo River, we need to remember there are no victories. There's only stays of execution. And that's because somebody is always there ready to take it away from us. And so I would remind everybody of that, these are not really wins. They're only temporary stays of execution, and we have to be vigilant if we're going to preserve these jewels that we have left in the Corn Belt of the U.S. And so Diane asked me to talk tonight about something that I wrote about a month or two ago, and I published it on my Substack. And the Cedar Rapids Gazette also asked me if they could run it, and they also ran it on the front page of their opinion section about a month ago. And so that's what I'm going to talk about this evening. And there's about 30 points here, and I'll just go through these. And first, I might say, Diane mentioned that I might have some insights on the legislature and why things can't get better in Iowa. And I will tell you that one of the reasons is over the last 20, 25 years or so, we've basically had bipartisan agreement on what agricultural production system we should have here in Iowa. And so most of our Democratic elected officials have been very supportive of CAFO agriculture, row crop agriculture, and the ethanol industry, especially the ethanol industry. And so, there's really been no opposition in Iowa to the current production system. And as a result, stuff gets pushed through with relative ease. And so what agriculture wants here in Iowa, they've been able to get regardless of which party is in power. And so my observation is one of the biggest things that needs to happen is we need to get one of the political parties to embrace a different perspective here on agriculture and the environment. And I'm continuously frustrated by people in the Democratic Party that are really willing to embrace, the current production system and embrace the status quo. There's this celebration of the Iowa farmer. I think there's really a mischaracterization of what the Iowa farmer is. We still cling to this idea that it's this rugged agrarian that's scratching out a living against all odds, against the weather and against the markets and so forth. And the truth is, the people that control the most of our land, the majority of our land, that description does not fit. These people are farming a large amount of acres. They're very wealthy in most circumstances. And, this is something that, the ag advocacy organizations really try to mislead the public on, that we still have the rugged agrarian out there. Well, we don't. That's not who's controlling the land now. We have big farmers farming big acres. And, this is very frustrating to me that people in the Democratic Party will not talk about this. And we see now our candidate for governor, our leading candidate for governor, Rob Sand, he's very reluctant to talk about water quality or talk about regulating ag pollution. And I think this is a big problem in Iowa. And so because of that, I wrote this piece that outlined some of my ideas of what a truly progressive candidate could embrace here in Iowa if someone was running for agriculture secretary or governor or some other office. And so the first one here is that ag pollution needs to be regulated. I think it's just painfully obvious that a voluntary approach to this is not going to work. We've been waiting for production agriculture to voluntarily correct this situation for half a century now, and the evidence is just not there that they're going to do it without laws. And so I think any progressive candidate for office here in Iowa really needs to think about how we can regulate the pollution from agriculture. Number two I have is we need to return zoning authority for livestock CAFOs to the counties. And so we saw the big expansion of the livestock industry here in the early 2000s after the development of the master matrix scheme for livestock siting that removed zoning authority from the counties, effectively removed zoning authority from the counties. And we've seen that this has been Farm Bureau's approach in other states, Missouri especially, but also Wisconsin and the Dakotas. And Farm Bureau has worked very hard to remove local authority for zoning of livestock facilities. And they want a statewide sort of scheme that is very difficult for the counties and the cities and the villages and so forth to fight against. And so I think any success in Iowa is going to have to include a return of zoning authority to the counties. We need to regulate nutrients at the watershed scale. We know that our main problem here is nutrient pollution with the nitrogen and phosphorus. We have the capacity to determine how many nutrients are needed in each of these watersheds. We have the capacity to determine how many livestock animals a watershed can endure and still have adequate water quality. We need to do that, and we need to regulate nutrients at the watershed scale. We need to restore riparian areas along stream banks. We know that Minnesota has a law that restricts cropping within 50 feet of a perennial stream. We need that in Iowa. We see all over Iowa, especially western Iowa and southern Iowa, farmers that crop right up to the brink of the stream edge. This is a terrible practice. It's Conservation 101 to back off from these streams. If we cannot protect these riparian areas in Iowa, then it truly is hopeless. And so we need candidates for office to support this practice where we move farmers back from perennial streams. A lot of our problems here in Iowa are caused by agricultural drainage tile. We have a network of porous pipes that probably about 2 million miles of these pipes that underlie our farmed fields in Iowa. This is the primary reason we have a nitrate problem in Iowa, is these drainage tile. So we need a moratorium on drainage tile, or we need any new tile to be accompanied by mitigation at the field edge at the expense of the farmer. Next, we need a development of a strategic plan that helps us retreat from corn ethanol. We have about 20% of our state, the area of 20 entire counties that are growing corn for ethanol, for use for fuel ethanol. I mean, this just cannot be justified. There's no environmental benefit to this. It pollutes our water. We need a retreat from fuel ethanol. We need state leaders that have the courage to advocate for this. We need development of policy incentivizing the production of alternative crops and livestock in pastoral systems. And so the inconvenient truth here is we will never get adequate water quality when we only have 2 species covering 70% of our land area. And of course, those 2 species are corn and soy. We need to diversify our cropping system. We need forage crops for livestock. We need to ban mowing and chemical application to ditches unless well-defined traffic hazards will result. I am convinced that this issue with the monarch butterfly is very much connected to the practice of mowing ditches across Iowa. And so we've lost a lot of valuable habitat in our ditches. Farmers mow these ditches. They think they're going to pollute their fields with weed seeds. We need to stop that practice. We need to ban fall tillage. We've known for 40 years that it's a terrible practice. Why do we allow it when it's clearly not necessary for robust crop yields in the corn and soy system? It's convenient for farmers, for sure, but my water should not be polluted because it's convenient for somebody else. We need to ban application of manure from December 1st to March 15th, no exceptions, and ban it onto snow at any date. We should require cover crops at landowner expense on all rented cropland. We need policies that inspire non-operator landowners to sell that cropland. This could be one of several angles here. Over half of our land in Iowa is rented, right? And so we need that land to get into the hands of farmers that will farm it responsibly. We need a sales tax on grain-based livestock feed. And so the reason we have CAFOS in the first place is because it's economically advantageous for a farmer to do that. Why is that? Because there's no sales tax on livestock feed. And so if we tax livestock feed, perhaps we could get more animals in pastoral systems. We need to get corn and soybean off of marginal land. If you don't know, we rate our farmland using a corn suitability rating in Iowa. And everywhere it goes from 0 to 100. We need to get a corn and soy off a CSR land less than 50, and perhaps provide property tax relief if farmers agree to plant other crops like oats or alfalfa or clovers on this marginal land. And so we know this marginal land can really pollute disproportionately. Let's get corn and soy off that land. We need to develop policy to create markets for alternative crops such as oats, wheats, barley, and livestock forages. And so farmers can't grow something if they don't have a market for it. And so we need a government policy that helps us create these markets for alternative crops. We need zealous regulation of pesticide applications, especially from airplanes. And if you live in Iowa, you know, anymore we almost have a D-Day invasion of crop dusters these days, especially in late summer when we're applying fungicides to crops. We're killing oak trees all across the state. We're killing orchards. We're killing grapevines. We need some laws here, and we need zealous regulation of those laws. This has really become common, and I think it's really epidemic. And so we have a lot of our fish kills in Iowa that are caused by these crop dusters. And this is something that really has an urgent need, I think. We need onerous penalties for those in agribusiness that are killing our streams. We've seen over and over again over the past 5 years how these agribusiness giants have released chemical and fertilizer into streams and killed entire rivers. And so this happened down at Red Oak with New Cooperative. It happened up on the Turkey River with the Three Rivers Cooperative. We see Agristar up in Postville polluting the Yellow River for years on end without any sort of punitive action from DNR. We have CJ Bio up in Fort Dodge, killed Lizard Creek here earlier this year. We cannot badger farmers to do better when we let these agribusiness giants just kill entire streams. You know, we need elected leaders to address this. Get these bad actors out of the state. I don't understand why we tolerate this as citizens. This is a terrible thing, and there should be an uproar over this. I also think this environmental condition that we have here in Iowa is very connected to the decline of rural Iowa. We've got 99 counties in Iowa. We have 70 of them losing population. We have so many of our towns across Iowa that used to be prosperous. Now they're not. They're losing population. Their infrastructure is crumbling. We need policy that corrects this. And so how can we connect food production to rural development in Iowa? I think we need policy to do this. And so some of these ideas I have are a free fruit tree for any Iowan that wants that. Believe it or not, Iowa was the #1 apple producing state prior to World War II. This is a great place to grow fruit. Why don't we do that? Our Department of Agriculture could help provide assistance to any town or city that wants to create a community orchard. We could create land halos around the city for food production, around the cities for food production. Each city can manage or prescribe or incentivize food production as they see fit within certain guidelines, fruit and vegetable production, grazed livestock, or whatever the city might like. Iowa school children should eat food grown and raised in Iowa and from nowhere else. All children that want it could eat breakfast and lunch for free at their school. We know we could do this for less than half the cost of the school vouchers that we have in Iowa. And so I just think it's a disgrace that we can't grow food for our own school children as we continue to just grow corn for ethanol production. We could create a fleet of food mobiles. And so we know in these rural areas, we have some real food deserts, right? Just like in the inner cities. They don't have grocery stores, and we have so many people that eat their meals at Casey's and Quick Star and Quick Trip across rural Iowa. How about if we have grocery stores on wheels that make regular rounds to rural Iowa towns and urban food deserts that are a minimum distance from a grocery store? We need to help create markets and incentivize food production for food crops, things like sweet corn, beans of all kinds, kernza, wheat, oats, fruit, nuts, root vegetables, and many others that could be grown in Iowa. We grow a lot of this stuff in the western U.S. Where it requires irrigation and it's done really in an unsustainable way. We could do a lot of that here in Iowa if we wanted to. We know food production requires labor, and so we could fast track the farm workers necessary for food production for citizenship. 70 of our counties have declining population. We're historically one of the slowest growing states. Believe it or not, in 1960, Iowa had as many electoral votes as Florida. And so that ought to tell you something. And so we need these immigrants in Iowa. Immigrant labor could help revitalize rural Iowa. And field workers could be trained to work in all facets of food production, including processing, storage, and distribution. We need more parks in Iowa. We are 48th or 49th in the amount of public land. I look at Arkansas and Missouri, who have both have problems with ag pollution, but they also have a lot of public land. And so Arkansas passed a bill similar to Iowa's I Will, but Arkansas funded theirs, right? And so Arkansas uses their sales tax to fund natural areas and fund their parks. Why don't we do that in Iowa? We could easily do it. We need more parks, and why Democrats don't run on this sort of thing, on more parks for Iowa, I don't know. It's so painfully obvious that we do not have enough areas in Iowa to enjoy nature. Lastly, we need to separate the College of Agriculture at Iowa State from the clutches of big agriculture, and we need to return it to the public. This incestuous relationship between corporate agribusiness and land grant research is a disgrace to our state. That's just the bottom line. And this is supported by tax dollars in just a multiple of ways. It's a malignant tumor for us, and it's contributed to our water pollution in a very large way. And so I'm not sure how we do this, but I think elected people need to take a stab at this. Our enforcement agency in Iowa is the Department of Natural Resources. I think enforcement in Iowa is terrible. It's, I mean, what can you say about it? It's almost non-existent. And I think DNR is unsalvageable in my view. I think the culture there is very pro-agriculture. If a Democratic governor candidate is elected, I think we need to break up DNR. We need to divide it into a pollution control agency similar to what Minnesota has, and then return the rest of it to the old Conservation Commission, which is the Parks and Wildlife, and and the rest of what they do, because I think DNR is dysfunctional and does the public no favors with the work that they do. We need to get candidates to support a constitutional amendment for clean water and clean air. This is something we've proposed with the Driftless Water Defenders. You know, so many of our parks and our beaches and our lakes are unusable in the summertime. We have polluted groundwater, polluted surface water. We know we have polluted drinking water that's very likely contributing to this second highest cancer rate. We as Iowans deserve better. I'm convinced of that. We live here. We deserve to have certain things that contribute to the quality of life, and better water is one of them. And so those are my ideas for better policy here to help the situation with CAFOS, but also the environmental condition in general.
Thank you, Chris. These are really important, needed suggestions, recommendations for the state. I mean, when you think about it, well, if all of these things were put in place, what a different place Iowa would be. And so I have one question for you. So we've got maybe about 25, 30 different points here. What would you say are the low-hanging fruits that you think could be achieved before some of the others?
The number one thing we need to do first is buffer streams. Okay. That is conservation 101. If we cannot buffer our streams, if we can't do what we can do, right, then how are we going to do these big grand ideas like having cover crops on half our land? I mean, that's a fantasy, right? If we can't even buffer our streams, Um, it's just crazy, I think, if we don't start at the low hanging fruit. And so buffering our streams is one. The second thing is returning local control to the counties, right? And so we have this master matrix thing. We see in the news here, there's 26 counties that want more authority on siting livestock facilities. And some of the, there's only 5 counties in Iowa that are blue, right? 4 or 5. And so 20 of these counties are Republican counties. They want more authority on how to cite these things. And so the master matrix, it was never good. It's worse now than it ever is, than it ever was. It's worse now than it ever was. Why don't we have Democratic candidates running on this? It's crazy. I mean, we know that there are conservative people that know that this master matrix thing is broken. And so those are the two things that we need to do immediately. If a Democratic governor candidate was elected, that's what they should focus on immediately.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I wouldn't mind seeing some Republicans take on these issues also. It doesn't have this, when I've worked with communities around the state opposing CAFOs, it hasn't been a Democrat or Republican issue. It's like if somebody doesn't want a CAFO, it doesn't really matter. If they're a Democrat or Republican, independent, libertarian, they don't want these CAFOs. It's an across the board, feeling in our state. And I think that Republicans are losing some opportunities as well because their supporters don't want them any more than Democrats.
Look, Republicans don't want to drink poisonous water any more than Democrats do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And we look at this Arkansas example, Asa Hutchinson and Sarah Huckabee are not exactly liberal snowflakes, right? And they were key in helping protect the Buffalo River. And so, look, I'm not MAGA. Believe me, I'm not MAGA, but I am ashamed of the Democratic Party in how they've addressed this issue in Iowa.
Well, it's been frustrating. It definitely has been.
Mm.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you for giving
You're
us this
welcome.
vision. And I feel like it's something that we as a community, as a state, really need to work toward. We can't just let that be hanging out there. This is something kind of like a blueprint that we can work toward. And I hope that this inspires a lot of people to really start to think how we can do this. And a lot of um, other organizations, environmental organizations, how we can do this. Um, I want to take this moment now to um, acknowledge and thank our bronze corporate sponsors for their support this year. These are more businesses and organizations that also appreciate and support JFAN's work and make it possible. So our bronze corporate sponsors this year are Ambient Control Systems, American Choice Water, Asian Fusion, which is formerly known as Green Gourmet. It's got a new name now. Frontline Print and Web, the Organic and Non-GMO Report, Power Sheet Cares, Southeast Iowa Sierra Club, and Wise Farms. Thank you all so much. And I encourage everyone here to support these companies and these organizations. They're all doing good work in our community and for our state. And I really deeply appreciate each and every one of them. Now, speaking of support, JFAN is a grassroots funded organization, and we've been able to do this work now for 20 years because of community support from people like all of you. And on that note, I'm going to introduce Francis Tickey, the former owner of Radiance Dairy, which is a regenerative organic dairy farm here in Fairfield. Francis holds a PhD in soil science. He's got a long resume of career accomplishments, and he was a board member, a JFAN board member for many years. He's now retired, living up in Minnesota, and he's still a strong supporter of JFAN. And he's going to take just a couple of minutes to share why he feels it's important to share, to support the work that we do. So, Francis, So nice to see you again.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, I've moved to Minnesota. And thanks also to Gordon Watkins and Chris Jones. Your presentations were really inspiring. I'm going to take 2 minutes to tell you why I think you should join me in supporting JFAN. I served on the JFAN board for many years, and I think JFAN is a very important organization for Jefferson County and actually far beyond. JFAN is a watchdog organization that has an eye out for any proposed new CAFOs in the Jefferson County area. When a new CAFO is proposed, JFAN helps local citizens organize if they decide they want to stand up to fight and try to stop the proposed CAFOs. JFAN is effective. We have heard actually from some CAFO builders that they want to avoid Jefferson County because they don't want the hassle of having to fight local citizens in order to impose their CAFOs on us. One frustrated CAFO builder even said, "The people in Jefferson County are crazy." Of course, we're not crazy. We just want to stand up for our rights to have clean air and clean water and protect our health. Nothing crazy about that. What is crazy is that CAFO developers think they can destroy our water and air quality and our health with impunity. Actually, the reach of JFAN is far beyond Jefferson County. The leadership of JFAN has inspired similar CAFO watchdog organizations across Iowa and beyond Iowa. I saw for this tonight's presentation on social media, the announcement for the meeting was shared by many, many individuals and organizations around Iowa and beyond. And we are very fortunate to have Diane Rosenberg as our executive director. I've been very impressed with Diane's deep understanding of CAFO issues, the legal issues, the health issues, and the effects of CAFOs on soil, water, and air quality, and Diane's ability to go toe-to-toe with CAFO developers in public debate. Diane has taught others across Iowa and beyond how to understand issues like the CAFO master matrix system, nutrient management plans, and soil phosphorus index, so that they can better understand to stand their ground against CAFO developers. In summary, JFAN is a critical organization for Jefferson County and beyond Jefferson County. Please join me in supporting JFAN financially at whatever level you're able to do. To make a contribution, you can go to JFAN's website or use the link provided in the chat box of this session here. Thanks for your support.
Thank you, Francis. I really appreciate your comments very much. And I really do want to encourage all of you to support the work that we do because our work is effective. I mean, here in Jefferson County, we have 7% of the 2.4 million hogs that's in our 6-county region. And we co-founded and actively work with the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, which is an Iowa-based coalition calling for a factory farm moratorium. IRA is why we've had a factory farm moratorium bill for the last 7 years. And we also JFAN also works in national coalitions, but we've only been able to do this for this 20 years because of community support. So if you can support us tonight, I appreciate it. I thank you. And I want to thank everyone who has already donated to JFAN leading up to this meeting, and also everyone who helped to make our recent fundraising drive a strong success. All right, so now it's time for your questions and some answers. So we've got a few questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to those and we will answer as many as we can. And please, if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A box, and we'll bring Gordon and Chris back here. And I'm going to start reading some of these questions. And so we need Chris. Well, while we're waiting for Chris, we have a
I'm
question.
here. I'm here.
Okay, good. Okay, so Gordon, I have a question from you. How did you get the dye test study done? And how can other groups replicate this? Can it be done proactively before CAFO starts operating?
I should point out that dye trace study was done without any cooperation by the state or by the CAFO operators. It was done, we were fortunate to have a noted retired hydrogeologist from the University of Arkansas conduct that study as a volunteer, and he had a team helping him out, a very qualified people who had done dye trace studies before who also helped him out. So that was a pro bono effort that was done outside of the administration of our state, and because it was peer reviewed, it carried weight, and that was an important factor on it. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be done proactively if it's being done outside of the bounds of the permit holder, who in most cases I wouldn't think would be cooperative. In the state, in Iowa, I would imagine the same case would be true, that the state would not be supportive of something like that, especially if they had to spend money for it.
Probably right. And Northeast Iowa, where Driftless Water Defenders works, that's a karst area, and there's a lot of issues up there. Have you seen anybody look at trying to do any of those dye tests up there, Chris?
So we've done research in the karst area going back, more than 40 years now. And some of the very first information that we got was from the Big Spring fish hatchery in Elkader, and where we saw atrazine and nitrate and other ag chemicals in these springs in the water in Northeast Iowa. And so, look, we know, this is pretty much settled science that these water soluble pollutants get into the aquifers and into these limestone streams in the karst areas very quickly. And so we see in Minnesota, the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy sued the agencies in Minnesota for that there'd be more urgent enforcement of various practices in Minnesota to reduce the loss of nitrate in these karst areas. And so, look, I don't think that the science is in question here. We know what happens. There's thin topsoils, the bedrock is fractured. When we over apply nutrients, it's going to pollute the water. I mean, there's just nothing left to be said about that. We know what it is. What's left to be said is why political leaders won't do anything about it.
Well, that leads to another question here. So, this person said Gordon mentioned federal requirements for karst sites were instrumental in their fight. Please elaborate what these requirements are.
Yeah, that's a good question, because it wasn't until we really developed an understanding of how permits are managed in Arkansas, particularly NPDES permits, which the CNH CAFO was the first and last NPDES permit for swine CAFOs in Arkansas. They terminated the program after CNH debacle. But one of the requirements of the permit makes reference to this guidance document from the U.S. Department of Agriculture called the Agricultural Waste Management Field Handbook. And that document is supposed to guide the decision making regarding siting of a facility, of a CAFO facility. And it goes into great detail about karst, what to do in karst, and how to survey a particular property for the presence of karst. And it works like a decision tree. And had the state properly followed that guidance document, which they did not, they would have the decision tree would have concluded that they needed to seek a separate site, a different site, because of the presence of karst. And we were never able to make that argument, even though we realized it pretty early on in our battle. It wasn't until that permit expired and came up for renewal and the public comment period opened that we were able to effectively make that argument. And I think that's what ultimately pushed it over the finish line for us, was showing that the state did not properly issue that permit. And that's what the governor recognized too. And that's why he was willing to pay $6.2 million to close this thing down, because he said it was the state's fault that they should not have issued it in the first place.
I mean, here we had Kayla Lyon remove all language about karst in our livestock rules. That happened relatively recently. And so, we would need an environmental group to sue, so that's what we need.
Part of what you're talking about, Chris, was that executive order number 10, where they, you know, basically deregulated the Chapter 65, which has all the CAFO rules. They deregulated that, as much as to a degree. And now with Chapter 65, you cannot make a rule that's more stringent than any of the rules that are already in there, that are already written. So you can weaken the rules, but you can't strengthen the rules that we've got right now, which was something that Governor Reynolds, initiated. It was an executive order, and then she got it passed as a law. So it's, it's pretty despicable, quite frankly, that we cannot, at this point, um, at least with rules, you have to pass the laws in order to have a more stringent, uh, law and rule put in. Um, so I have a question here. Very impressive work. Thank you. This is talking about, the Buffalo River. Um, Many of us are fighting CAFOs in areas that aren't near a national park. What would you say to groups that don't have the national park or a beautiful river to help motivate the community and state politicians? Actually, it's a good question for both of you.
Yeah, I've given that question a lot of thought, and I think in our case, there's no doubt that the presence of the Buffalo River made our job easier, if you call a 12-year battle easy. But in the end, it was really the technical issue challenging the permit that moved the needle. Now, the Buffalo River certainly widened our appeal. It built our base because so many people are familiar with the Buffalo River and so many people treasure it. It helped us, build an active base of supporters. It helped us raise money. It helped us get media attention for sure. But in the end, it was that technical argument, analyzing that permit from top to bottom, that really made us able to sway the governor. Now he like you said, he got more calls and letters about the Buffalo River issue than anything else in his 2 terms of office. So I'm sure he was tired of hearing it. But in the end, it was the technical argument that swayed the argument in our favor.
When you look at a map of Iowa, the CAFO map of Iowa, we basically have 2 donut holes there. One is Jefferson County, and Francis kind of hit on why that is the case. And the other one is Dickinson County, around Lake Okoboji, Spirit Lake, and the other Iowa Great Lakes. And so, what's special about Dickinson County? Well, there's a lot of wealthy people up there with a lot of very valuable real estate, right? And so let's just call it what it is. Rich people have been able to keep the CAFOs out of Dickinson County because they like taking their boats out on Lake West Okoboji and having clean water. And so, unfortunately, here in Iowa, we don't have many things like the Buffalo River, right? Most of our stuff has been ruined already. And so, what argument do we have? We don't. What do we have to preserve? And I do think there's an argument to be made that we should try to preserve that very little that we have left. And of course, in Iowa, that might be the Great Lakes and then the driftless area. But then, of course, then you're sort of writing off the other 90% of the state, which is sort of shameful also. And so these are important questions on how do we target our efforts. And I don't really have the answers here. I think the effect on human health here with the cancer and the drinking water and the overall quality of life. We have these beaches and constructed lakes that were built with taxpayer dollars. And so Lake Darling, very close to Fairfield there. I mean, that was constructed with taxpayer dollars, and then, it's polluted by private entities, and then the taxpayers are asked to come in and restore them. And so I think in Iowa, maybe an angle that we need to try is these lakes. And so we have about 130 lakes here in Iowa. I think about 100 of those have been constructed at taxpayer expense. I think there's a real argument to be made that the public is paid to build these things, and then they've been polluted by private entities. What's the remedy here in terms of why these things have been impaired?
Thank you. And I'll just add one little thing. I've been involved in a few different fights where the community found something in their community to really fight for and create um, uh, a lot of publicity around. One was in Potawatomi County, where there was a nature trail that was used quite a lot. And the community rallied around that, and they were able to stop this big chicken CAFO there. Up in Tama County, it was the right around the site of the home of the butter cow lady, the original butter cow lady, for the Iowa State Fair, and the community was able to rally around that. So there are these places that, if you can identify something in that community, and then the community stays together and persists, because that's the other part of it. They have to continue to stay and fight and strategize and work at it and know that it's not necessarily going to happen overnight, but it can happen, because it does. So, but it is hard in Iowa, like you said, Chris. It's very difficult. We don't have a lot, but we do have, sometimes you can identify some of these areas that are strategically, you can do a strategic plan to save. And so you got to go for what you've got sometimes.
I'll just say Bloody Run Creek is something we focused on at Driftless Water Defenders in Northeast Iowa. DNR has designated it as one of 30 some Iowa outstanding waters. It's 6 miles long. The stream is 6 miles long. DNR will not get in front of an 11,000 head cattle CAFO that goes in up there. The cattle are there. Have you ever heard a single Democratic candidate for any office in Iowa talk about Bloody Run Creek? Have you ever? I have not heard ever a single one talk about it. And so, as I said many times, the first step for Iowa is try to get the Democratic Party to embrace this issue.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. I think we have time for just a few more questions. Let's see what we got here. Has there ever been a decade in Iowa where the native Iowans really cared about the environment and water quality? I've listened to concerned people from environmental clubs and nonprofits talk about they've been fighting this uphill battle for decades. In other states, people care. How do you change people's hearts and minds? Have there ever been a time when legislators cared enough to fight for a good change in farming practices?
Well, in the 80s, after the studies at Big Spring up at Elkader came out, we did have some developments, and we had the groundwater tax that was voted into law. And that funded initially the Leopold Center and then the Recycling Center at UNI um, and the Center for Health and Environmental Effects at the University of Iowa. And so we had some other legislation in the 80s. Paul Johnson was part of that, David Osterberg, um, and then Ralph Rosenberg. And so there was a little bit of a momentum after the discovery of the ag chemicals in the water at Big Spring. But after the master matrix scheme became law in the early 2000s, I think it's been terrible since then. And so I think it's true that I think one of the commenters here tonight said there's more of an environmental ethic in Minnesota and Wisconsin. I lived in Minnesota for a long time, 16 years, and I think that's absolutely true. That the culture here and the ethic here is one of exploitation.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so I think that goes back, more than 100 years, that our mindset is what we have here is to be exploited. And, how do we change that? I don't have the answer on that. I think, I've been to Arkansas, I've been to the state parks in Arkansas, I've been to Missouri, and seen what Missouri has. And both Missouri and Arkansas have far better amenities when it comes to natural resources than what we have. But the pollution is also bad there. I've seen some very bad streams in Arkansas, in particular, and so I think I don't have the answer, but I do think a good step is to ask for more public land, ask for more parks. I know during COVID, our state parks and our county parks here in Iowa were jam packed. If you like camping or going to parks, if you did that during COVID, you saw that these parks were packed, right? And so I think there's a desire for more amenities here in Iowa, and I think that's one thing people could insist on.
Um, I have a couple more questions, but I have a question for you, Gordon, because you talked about how it's the technical stuff that was able to really help you succeed in getting this CAFO shut down and then the moratorium put in. There's a lot that goes into looking at these CAFOs, these applications from a technical basis. What kind of support did you have, to do that? I mean, I'm just curious what resources were available to you in Arkansas that, possibly may be available to people in Iowa too.
Well, we first tried to talk to the agencies which issued the permits, Department of Environmental Quality particularly, uh, asked them to help us understand the permits. Well, they just kind of talked us in circles.
Mhm.
I don't think they really understood. And I should mention that the one person who was primarily responsible for issuing the CNH permit now works for Farm Bureau. So that tells you a little bit about their mentality. But I think mostly we were self-taught. We spent hours and hours and hours poring over guidance documents and regulations, and we had to understand the permitting process. We had to understand how to read nutrient management plans, which led us into having to understand the phosphorus index. I don't know if it's in use in Iowa or not, but it was actually developed primarily here in Arkansas by a person who was assigned to study the CNH problem early on with the University of Arkansas. Um, but I would say primarily we had to learn on our own, and that was a long and arduous process, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, it's a lot because, I've done some of that, with the work I've done, and there's a lot to it. So I'm very impressed that you were able to pull that all together
We
over time
had
like that.
lots we had lots of eyeballs on it, and we did have some professional help. We had attorneys that helped
Mhm.
us.
Yeah.
Earth Justice was a big help in pointing us in the right direction. We're also part of several other um, collaborative groups that had some expertise that helped us. But so much of the permitting process is state specific.
Right.
NPDS permits are a little bit different because they are a federal permit, um, but some of that outside help didn't always point us in the right direction, but it was helpful.
Thank you. And we're getting short on time. I'm just going to share one thing from Senator Art State here, and he wrote, Chris, I'm writing bills for some of the items you've mentioned, but not all. Could you send me your list of ideas? Okay, so um, you're on mute.
I'll just put it in the chat here. Um,
Okay.
uh,
Yeah, a number of um, a number of us with the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture met with Senator Stade about a month and a half ago to talk about water quality bills and CAFO bills, and he does have a slate of bills he's going to be introducing, which we were all very grateful for. So I think we are pretty much a lot more questions, and I'm sorry we can't get to them all, but I think we've kept you all for a long time, and I really appreciate having this meeting with Gordon, you tonight, and with you, Chris. Appreciate you sharing, your story, Gordon. And Chris, I really appreciate you sharing your policy platform because I think it really gives us some very important, um, you know, uh, goals to work toward. And I just really want to encourage all of us on this meeting tonight to to work in whatever ways you can to advocate for better agricultural policy in Iowa because we deserve having clean drinking water, we deserve having safe recreational waters, and we deserve having our public health protected. And for people living in other states, that are here with us tonight, I encourage you to do all you can to protect your quality too, because water quality too, because this is actually, it's a national problem. It's a big problem in Iowa, but it's not just here. So on that advocacy note, I want to uh, tell you to just remind you to watch for that email with all the links for taking action to improve Iowa's water quality and to oppose the federal legislation that would make our food less safe, our air less safe, our water more polluted. Gordon and Chris, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. I want to thank all of our generous corporate sponsors again, and I do want to give a nod of the head to Susan Chapin, who works with JFAN to help us do fundraising and work with our corporate sponsors. She's a big part of our success in our being able to gather the grassroots support that we have. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Gordon and Chris. And I hope you all have a really wonderful rest of your evening.